Verified department records. Genuine field evidence. Unbiased justice. Welcome to Bodycam Incident Reports.
Sir, I told you already. You need to leave this property, now.
I'm not leaving. I belong here. I haven't broken any law.
You don't get to decide that. Step away from the door and show me ID.
I'm a retired U.S. Army Master Sergeant. I'm standing on a public sidewalk.
I don't care who you think you are.
Then you're about to make the biggest mistake of your career.
Officer Kyle Vance had been wearing the badge of the Metro Police Department for 6 years when he made the decision that would implode his career, humiliate his superiors, and cost the taxpayers of the city $1.9 million. He was 29 years old, fit, aggressive, and entirely convinced that his authority was absolute. On a bright, crisp Tuesday morning outside the Oakwood Community Center, he received a dispatch call regarding a suspicious individual refusing to leave the premises. The suspicious individual was Master Sergeant retired Marcus Thorne, a man who had served the United States Army for 25 years, standing stoically by the entrance with a canvas bag of books and coffee waiting to unlock the doors. What Officer Vance did next, ignoring the man's calm demeanor, dismissing his verbal identification, and physically assaulting a disabled combat veteran in plain view of morning commuters, would become a searing indictment of how quickly protect and serve can curdle into dominate and control. Before we get into the details of this miscarriage of justice, where are you tuning in from? If you believe that our veterans deserve better than handcuffs and pavement, please hit that subscribe button. We need to tell these stories because the mainstream media often moves on too fast, but the scars last a lifetime. The Oakwood Community Center is a brick-and-mortar staple of the neighborhood, sitting squarely on the corner of Elm and Main. It's the heartbeat of the district, a place that hosts everything from morning yoga for seniors to evening town halls. The neighborhood itself is in transition. What used to be a working-class block of row houses is slowly being transformed by developers into condos and high-end retail spaces. New money is moving in, and with it, a new set of expectations about who belongs on the sidewalk and who doesn't. It was 8:45 a.m. The sun was cutting through the maple trees, casting long shadows across the pavement. The morning traffic was steady, people rushing to offices and appointments. Marcus Thorne stood near the double-glass doors of the center. He wasn't hiding. He wasn't lurking. He was standing with his feet shoulder-width apart, hands clasped behind his back, staring at the horizon with the patience of a man who had spent days waiting in the desert heat for orders that might never come. He was wearing a clean-pressed pair of cargo pants, a gray polo shirt tucked in with a military web belt, and sturdy hiking boots. At 48 years old, Thorne cut an imposing figure, broad shoulders, a shaved head, and a face that looked like it was carved from granite. But his eyes were calm. He wasn't bothering the pedestrians walking their dogs. He wasn't asking for money. He was simply waiting. The janitor, old Mr. Henderson, was running late with the master alarm code, and Thorne was merely holding the post until he arrived. But to the wrong set of eyes, patience looks like loitering, and silence looks like a threat. Marcus Thorne was not a man who sought attention. For 2.5 decades, he had been a ghost in the machine of the United States military, a master sergeant who specialized in logistics and forward operating base security. He had done 4 tours in Iraq and 3 in Afghanistan. He had organized supply lines under mortar fire in Fallujah. He had negotiated with village elders in the Kandahar province. He had held the hands of 19-year-old boys as they bled out in the sand, promising them that they would not be forgotten. When he retired 3 years ago, he brought home a chest full of medals, including a Purple Heart and a Bronze Star with Valor, and a body held together by surgical pins and sheer willpower. His right shoulder had been shattered by an IED blast in 2014, leaving him with limited range of motion and chronic pain that he managed with meditation and swimming, never opioids. He didn't drink. He didn't complain. He lived a life of regimented simplicity. For the past 10 years, even during his final years of active duty when he was stationed locally, Thorne had volunteered at the Oakwood Community Center. He ran the Vets for Vets support group every Tuesday morning at 9 a.m. It was a lifeline for men and women returning home with ghosts in their heads. Thorne was the rock they clung to. He arrived early every single week to set up the chairs, brew the coffee, and ensure the room was a safe space before the others arrived. He was a fixture. The neighborhood kids knew him as Sarge. The local shop owners waved when he walked by, but neighborhoods change and memory is short. That Tuesday, Thorne had arrived at 8:30 a.m. as usual. He found the doors locked. Mr. Henderson, the custodian who usually unlocked the facility, had called Thorne 10 minutes earlier, apologetic, saying his car wouldn't start and he'd be 20 minutes late. Thorne had told him not to worry. "I'll stand watch, Jim. Get here when you get here." So, Thorne stood watch. He placed his bag on the concrete bench containing the group's sign-in sheets and a bag of premium coffee he bought out of his own pocket, and assumed his waiting stance. He was reviewing the lesson plan for the day in his mind, thinking about how to help a young Marine who had just joined the group deal with his survivor's guilt. He didn't know that 50 feet away through the blinds of the administrative office window he was being watched. He didn't know that his stillness was being interpreted as obstinance. He didn't know that his very presence was about to trigger a chain of events that would expose the ugly underbelly of the safety culture permeating the new Oakwood. Thorne was a man who believed in the chain of command in rules and in the inherent decency of institutions. He believed that if you followed the law, honored your country, and carried yourself with dignity, you would be afforded respect. He was experienced enough to know the world was unfair, but he still held on to the idea that in his own neighborhood, on his own block, his service meant something. He was about to find out that to some people a black man standing still is a crime in itself. Julianne Ebersol had been the operations manager at the Oakwood Community Center for exactly 3 weeks. At 34 years old, she was a whirlwind of new policies, new memos, and a desperate need to prove that she could clean up the place. She had been hired by a board of directors that wanted to modernize the center to make it more appealing to the affluent families moving into the newly renovated lofts downtown. Julianne took that mandate seriously. She saw herself not just as an administrator, but as the guardian of the neighborhood's aesthetic. She didn't know the history of the place. She didn't know the regulars. She didn't know Marcus Thorne. What she saw through her window was a large, muscular black man in paramilitary clothing standing right by the front door. He hadn't moved in 15 minutes. He wasn't looking at a phone. He was just standing there staring out at the street. To Julianne, whose previous experience was in managing high-end HOA properties in the suburbs, this was a red flag. This was blight. This was a deterrent to the mothers with strollers who would be arriving for the 10 o'clock a.m. tumble tots class. She watched him for another 5 minutes, her anxiety spiraling into a narrative of danger. Why is he just standing there? Is he casing the building? Is he on drugs? He looks intense. In her mind, Thorne wasn't a veteran waiting for a key. He was a vagrant staking a claim. She convinced herself that she had seen him scowl at a passerby, though Thorne had merely squinted against the sun. Julianne didn't walk outside to ask him if he needed help. She didn't open the door to ask his business. That would require confronting her own discomfort. Instead, she chose the path of least resistance and maximum escalation. She picked up the phone. 911, what is your emergency? This isn't an emergency, but I need an officer at the Oakwood Community Center immediately. Julianne said, her voice trembling with a manufactured fear she had talked herself into. There is a man refusing to leave the entrance. He's blocking the doors. Is he aggressive, ma'am? Is he armed? He looks very aggressive. Julianne lied, justifying it to herself as a preventative measure. He's a very large man dressed in military-style clothes. He's been loitering here for half an hour. I'm afraid to open the doors for the staff. He looks like he might be mentally unstable. Has he threatened anyone? He's making people uncomfortable, Julianne said, using the magic words that she knew would trigger a response. Parents are trying to drop off kids and they are scared to walk past him. That was another lie. There were no parents yet. The Tumble Tots class didn't start for an hour. But Julianne needed him gone, and she needed the police to prioritize it. "Okay, ma'am. We have an officer in the vicinity. We'll send someone over to remove him." Julianne hung up, feeling a surge of righteous accomplishment. She was protecting her facility. She was doing her job. She peeked through the blinds again. Thorne hadn't moved. He was just breathing the morning air, oblivious to the fact that his description, large black male military clothing, aggressive possible mental health issue, was currently being beamed to a patrol car 2 blocks away. Officer Kyle Vance heard the dispatch and felt a familiar surge of adrenaline. Aggressive male, refusing to leave, scaring women and children. This was the kind of call Vance liked. It was straightforward. It required a show of force. Vance was not a bad cop in his own eyes. He saw himself as a sheepdog. The world was full of wolves, and it was his job to bark and bite until the wolves ran away. But in his 6 years on the force, his definition of a wolf had become dangerously broad. He had accumulated 14 complaints in his short career. Most were for discourtesy or unprofessional conduct. 2 were for excessive force. All of them had been dismissed or resulted in minor counseling. The department knew Vance was a hothead. His sergeant had told him twice to dial it back. But his arrest numbers were high. He cleared corners. He made the stats look good. And in a department that was understaffed and overworked, results often mattered more than methods. Vance had a specific view of the district he patrolled. He believed that order was maintained through dominance. If you gave an inch, they took a mile. If you let a guy loiter today, tomorrow he's selling drugs, and the day after that he's breaking windows. Broken windows policing was his Bible, but he read it with a heavy accent on the punishment and very little on the community. He pulled his cruiser up to the curb in front of the community center at 8:53 a.m. He didn't park in a spot. He pulled up diagonally, blocking the view, establishing territory. He stepped out of the vehicle, adjusting his utility belt. He didn't put his hat on. He wanted to look ready for a fight. He saw the suspect immediately. Thorne matched the description perfectly. Big guy, cargo pants, standing like a statue. Vance didn't see a disciplined soldier. He saw a defiant thug who thought he owned the sidewalk. He didn't see the calm posture. He saw the 1,000-yard stare of someone on something or someone looking for trouble. Vance didn't start with a good morning. He didn't start with, "Can I help you?" He walked around the front of his cruiser, his hand resting instinctively near his holster, his chest puffed out. He had already decided how this interaction was going to go. The subject was going to submit, or the subject was going to be made to submit. He walked fast, closing the distance, aggressively invading Thorne's personal space before a word was spoken. This was a tactic Vance used often: shock and awe. Make them back up, make them flinch. But Marcus Thorne didn't flinch. He didn't step back. He simply turned his head slowly, his eyes locking onto Vance's sunglasses. He watched the officer approach with the same detached assessment he had used to watch convoys approaching a checkpoint. And that lack of fear was the first thing that offended Officer Vance. "You need to move along, pal. You can't be here," Vance barked, stopping 3 feet from Thorne's face. Thorne didn't break his stance. He kept his hands clasped behind his back. He spoke in a deep, resonant baritone that carried no anger, only authority. "Good morning, officer. I am waiting for the facility to open." "Did you hear me? I said move along. We got calls. You're scaring the staff. You're trespassing on private property." "This is a public community center, officer, and I am not trespassing. I am a volunteer and a key holder. The custodian is late." Thorne nodded toward the glass doors. "If you check with the administration." "I don't need to check anything," Vance interrupted, stepping closer. "The manager called it in. She wants you gone. That means you're gone. Now take a walk before I write you up for loitering." Thorne took a slow breath. He recognized the type. He had seen young lieutenants like this in the desert, arrogant, eager for action, and dangerous because they didn't know what they didn't know. "Officer, my name is Marcus Thorne. I am a retired master sergeant. I run the Veterans Support Group here every Tuesday at 0900. I am not leaving my post because a manager I have never met is confused. Oh, you're a lawyer now. You're a sergeant, Vance sneered. He hated when suspects claimed status. I don't care if you're the Joint Chiefs of Staff. When I tell you to move, you move. Let me see some ID. I am not required to show you identification. I have committed no crime. I am standing on a public sidewalk. Failure to identify. Disobeying a lawful order. Vance recited, his voice rising, playing to the invisible audience he imagined was cheering him on. You're making this difficult, Marcus. Is that your name, Marcus? My name is Mr. Thorne to you, officer. Vance's face flushed red. The lack of submission was eating at him. He was losing control of the dynamic, and his only tool for regaining it was escalation. Last chance. Get your hands out from behind your back and show me ID or you're going for a ride. Thorne remained perfectly still. I have a bag on the bench there. My wallet is inside. I am happy to show you my ID if you ask me respectfully and acknowledge that I have a right to be here, but I will not be bullied off this corner like a criminal. That's it, Vance snapped. You're under arrest for trespassing and disorderly conduct. Disorderly? Thorne raised an eyebrow. I haven't moved an inch. Turn around, hands on your head. Vance reached out and grabbed Thorne's right shoulder, the shoulder that had been reconstructed with titanium and screws. Thorne winced, a sharp intake of breath hissing through his teeth as the nerve pain shot down his arm. Watch the shoulder, officer. I have a combat injury. Stop resisting, Vance yelled, though Thorne hadn't moved. The officer interpreted the wince as resistance. He yanked the arm harder, twisting it behind Thorne's back with unnecessary torque. I am not resisting, Thorne said through gritted teeth, his voice straining but still controlled. You are hurting a disabled veteran. You are making a mistake that you cannot undo. Shut up. Vance shoved Thorne against the brick wall of the center. Spread 'em. By now, the commotion had drawn attention. 2 women from the accounting firm next door had stopped on the sidewalk. A delivery driver had pulled over, and inside the community center, the front door clicked open. It wasn't Julianne Ebersol. It was Mrs. Gable, the 60-year-old receptionist who had known Thorne for a decade. She stepped out, her eyes widening in horror. Behind her was a young man, a summer intern, who immediately pulled out his smartphone. Officer, stop, Mrs. Gable shouted, rushing toward them. That is Mr. Thorne. He works here. Vance ignored her. He was in the tunnel now. He had the cuffs out. He slapped one onto Thorne's right wrist and wrenched the left arm back. Thorne groaned a low, guttural sound of pain as the metal bit into his skin and his shoulder joint screamed in protest. Back off, lady, Vance yelled over his shoulder. This subject is under arrest. He's not a subject, Mrs. Gable screamed, tears forming in her eyes. He's a hero. He's waiting for the meeting. Julianne, tell him. Julianne Ebersol had emerged from the door looking pale. She saw the scene. The aggressive man was being handcuffed, but he wasn't fighting. He was calm, and the receptionist was screaming in his defense. Julianne realized with a sinking feeling in her gut that she had miscalculated, but she was too proud to admit it. She stood frozen in the doorway, saying nothing. I am complying, Thorne said loud enough for the intern's phone to pick up. I am Master Sergeant Marcus Thorne. I am not resisting. This officer is injuring my surgically repaired shoulder. I am asking you to loosen the cuffs. Tell it to the judge, Vance grunted. He double-locked the cuffs tight. He patted Thorne down roughly, pulling the wallet from the bag on the bench and shoving it into his own pocket without looking at it. He spun Thorne around. You're making a scene, you know that, Vance said, panting slightly from the exertion. Thorne looked Vance in the eye. The veteran's face was covered in a sheen of sweat from the pain, but his gaze was unbroken. I didn't make the scene, officer. You did. And this video, he nodded toward the intern, is going to end your career. Get in the car. Vance shoved him toward the cruiser. He forced Thorne's large frame into the back seat, bending his head down roughly. Thorne had to twist his body to protect his shoulder, gasping as he sat on the hard plastic seat. Vance slammed the door. He walked around to the driver's side, feeling a moment of triumph. He had cleared the corner. He had won. He looked at the crowd gathering on the sidewalk, Mrs. Gable crying, the intern filming the delivery driver, shaking his head, and he felt a flicker of doubt. But he crushed it. He was the law. The law is never wrong. He got in, radioed that he had one in custody, and pulled away from the curb, leaving the veteran's bag of books and coffee sitting on the bench like a tombstone. The ride to the 4th precinct took 15 minutes. Thorne sat in the back, practicing tactical breathing. In through the nose for 4, hold for 4, out through the mouth for 4. He needed to manage the pain in his shoulder, which was now a throbbing fire. He needed to keep his heart rate down. He knew that any outburst now would be used against him. He remained silent. Vance glanced in the rearview mirror, expecting the suspect to be cursing, kicking the doors, or begging. The silence unnerved him. "Quiet back there. I realized you screwed up." Thorne said nothing. They arrived at the station. Vance pulled Thorne out of the car and marched him into the booking area. The precinct was busy. Phones were ringing. Officers were typing reports. At the main desk sat Desk Sergeant Miller, a 55-year-old veteran of the force with gray hair and a mustache that had seen 3 decades of city history. "What do we have, Vance?" Miller asked, not looking up from his paperwork. "Trespassing, disorderly, refusing to ID, resisting..." Vance rattled off the charges, pushing Thorne toward the counter. Miller looked up. He saw the man in handcuffs. He saw the military bearing. He saw the scar on the neck. He saw the pained grimace that the man was trying to hide. "Refusing to ID?" Miller asked, looking at Thorne. "Sir, do you have identification?" "It is in my wallet." Thorne said, his voice raspy. "Officer Vance confiscated it. It is in his pocket." Miller held out his hand to Vance. "Give me the wallet." Vance handed it over. He wouldn't show it at the scene. He was being difficult. Miller opened the worn leather bifold. The first thing he saw was not a driver's license. It was a retired military identification card. Master Sergeant Marcus Thorne, U.S. Army. Below that was another card, City Council Veterans Advisory Board, board member. And tucked behind that was a folded copy of his VA disability rating, 100% service-connected. Miller's face went white. He looked from the ID to Thorne, then to Vance. "Vance," Miller said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You arrested Marcus Thorne." "I don't know, is that his name?" "He was loitering at the community center." "He's on the city council board, you idiot," Miller hissed. "He runs the support group there. We send our own guys to him for counseling." Vance froze. The manager called. She said he was threatening." Miller ignored Vance. He came around the desk, moving faster than he had in years. "Uncuff him. Now." "Sarge," he resisted. "I said uncuff him right now." Miller roared, silencing the entire room. Every officer stopped what they were doing. Vance fumbled for his keys. He unlocked the cuffs. Thorne brought his arms forward, slowly groaning as the blood rushed back. His wrists were deeply indented and bruised. "Mr. Thorne," Miller said, his tone apologetic and horrified. "I am incredibly sorry. I know who you are. I know your service." Thorne rubbed his wrists. He looked at Vance, who was standing there pale and shrinking. "Sergeant Miller," Thorne said calmly, "I need medical attention for my shoulder, and I want to file a formal complaint against this officer for assault, false imprisonment, and violation of my civil rights. I also want his body camera footage secured immediately." "It's already done," Miller said. He looked at Vance with a look of absolute disgust. "Vance, put your badge and gun on the counter. You're going into the captain's office. Don't speak to anyone." Vance looked at the wallet on the desk. He looked at the man he had called a thug. He realized with a nausea that hit him like a wave that the wolf he thought he had caught was actually a lion, and the lion was about to eat him alive. The fallout was swift, brutal, and public. The video taken by the intern hit social media before Thorne had even left the hospital. It showed everything. The calm veteran, the hysterical manager in the doorway, the aggressive officer twisting the arm of a man who wasn't fighting back. The headline wrote itself, "Hero Handcuffed Cop Assaults Disabled Vet at Community Center." By 5:00 p.m. that Tuesday, protesters had gathered outside the Oakwood Community Center. By Wednesday morning, Julianne Ebersol was fired. The board of directors released a statement condemning her racial bias and lack of judgment. She tried to sue for wrongful termination, but the discovery phase revealed her text messages to a friend describing Thorne as a scary stray, which sealed her fate in the court of public opinion. Officer Kyle Vance was placed on unpaid suspension. The internal affairs investigation was concluded in record time, largely because Master Sergeant Thorne testified with the precision of a man who had written thousands of incident reports. Vance was fired 3 weeks later. The chief of police personally apologized to Thorne, but the apology didn't fix the torn rotator cuff that required another surgery to repair. Thorne sued the city and the police department. He didn't do it for the money. He did it to force a change in policy. The lawsuit exposed the pattern of complaints against Vance that had been ignored. It exposed the lack of de-escalation training. The city settled for $1.9 million to avoid a trial that would have been a public relations massacre. Marcus Thorne donated a significant portion of the settlement to the Vets for Vets program, ensuring it had permanent funding. He returned to the community center the very next Tuesday, his arm in a sling to unlock the doors. But the story isn't just about the money or the firing. It's about the silence that fell over the neighborhood. The realization that for all our flags and bumper stickers supporting the troops, we still judge a book by its cover. We still allow fear to dictate how we treat our neighbors. Marcus Thorne stood on that corner for 25 years defending the Constitution. He stood there that Tuesday defending his dignity. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? If a man with a chest full of medals, a spotless record, and the patience of a saint can be treated like a criminal on a sunny Tuesday morning, what happens to the young man who doesn't have the rank? What happens to the person who can't remain calm while their arm is being twisted? Justice was served in the end, but the scar remains, not just on Marcus Thorne's shoulder, but on the conscience of a community that had to ask itself, who are we really protecting, and who are we afraid of? Do you think the settlement was enough? Or should Officer Vance have faced criminal charges for assault? And do you think managers like Julianne should be personally liable for making false reports? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you appreciate us bringing you the truth behind the headlines, please like and subscribe. It helps us keep the lights on and the stories coming. Until next time, stay safe and watch out for each other.
Sir, I'm not asking again. Turn around and give me your ID. Now.
Officer, you have no probable cause. I'm a citizen waiting for a bus.
You fit the description. You don't get to debate me on my street.
This isn't your street. It's the Constitution. Step back.
Officer Kyle Vance had his hand on his holster, the leather strap unsnapped, his knuckles white against the grip of his service weapon. It was 1:15 p.m. on a bright Tuesday afternoon in Oak Creek, a suburb that prided itself on manicured lawns, low crime rates, and keeping the wrong element out. Vance was 28 years old, standing 6'1" with a gym-sculpted physique that he spent more time maintaining than he did reading the department's policy manual. He had been with the Oak Creek Police Department for 6 years, and in that time he had cultivated a reputation. To the rookies, he was the guy who got things done, the proactive cop who didn't wait for trouble to find him. To his sergeants and the department's legal team, Kyle Vance was a walking liability with a badge. Vance's file was a thick catalog of aggressive behavior and borderline misconduct. 9 complaints in 6 years. 9. Most officers go an entire career with maybe 1 or 2. Vance collected them like trophies. 7 of those complaints involved allegations of profiling, harassment, or excessive force against minority citizens. There was the time he detained a Hispanic landscaping crew for an hour because he thought their leaf blowers sounded suspicious. There was the incident with the Indian doctor whose luxury car broke down. Vance had approached him with weapon drawn, screaming about a stolen vehicle before checking the registration. In every previous instance, the police union had stepped in. They argued that Vance was zealous, that he was vigilant, and that in a dangerous world you want a sheepdog who bares his teeth. The Internal Affairs Division, understaffed and tired of fighting the union reps, had sustained only 2 minor infractions, resulting in a day of unpaid suspension and a seminar on community relations that Vance had spent looking at his phone. He had learned nothing except that he was untouchable. He believed his judgment was absolute. He believed that if he felt something was off, it was off. And today, his gut told him that the black man standing at the bus stop on the corner of Elm and Main didn't belong. The man was older, calm, and maddeningly unbothered by Vance's shouting. He stood with his feet shoulder-width apart, his back straight, holding a sweating cup of iced tea in one hand and a folded newspaper in the other. He wasn't running. He wasn't reaching. He was just watching Vance with a look of disappointed appraisal, like a teacher watching a student fail a simple test. "Officer," the man said, his voice a deep resonant baritone that carried easily over the sound of passing traffic. "My name is Marcus Thorne. I am 62 years old. My car is at the mechanic's down the street. I am transferring to the number 14 bus to go to a dental appointment. I am not getting on the ground in my good slacks because you have an overactive imagination." "You match the description of a suspect calling in for casing vehicles." Vance lied. There was no description. There was hardly a call, just a vague complaint. But Vance needed control. He needed this man to submit. "Now drop the bag, turn around, and interlace your fingers behind your head." "I have no bag," Thorne said, gesturing with the newspaper. "I have a paper and a tea. Check your eyes, officer." Vance stepped closer, invading Thorne's personal space, trying to use his height and bulk to intimidate. But Thorne didn't flinch. He didn't step back. He held his ground, his eyes locking onto Vance's with a steely intensity that should have warned the young officer to back off. But Vance was too far gone, too wrapped up in the adrenaline and the anger of being told no. He wasn't seeing a citizen with rights. He was seeing a challenge to his authority. And Kyle Vance never backed down from a challenge, even when he was dead wrong. Marcus "Gunny" Thorne had faced down men with AK-47s in the dust of Fallujah and stared into the eyes of warlords in Mogadishu without blinking. He had served 26 years in the United States Marine Corps, retiring with the rank of gunnery sergeant. He had worn the uniform of his country across 3 decades and 4 continents. He had led platoons of frightened young men through hell and brought them home. He understood violence, he understood authority, and most importantly, he understood discipline. Thorne was not a man who panicked. Panic was a luxury for people who hadn't seen what he had seen. Since retiring 7 years ago, he had settled into a quiet life in the neighboring district. He was a widower now. His wife Martha had passed 3 years prior, leaving him with a silent house, a meticulously kept garden, and a collection of medals in a shadow box in the den. He spent his days volunteering at the local VFW, reading history books and keeping himself in shape. He walked 3 miles every morning. He ironed his shirts. He shined his shoes. He lived by the code he had sworn to at Paris Island: honor, courage, commitment. That Tuesday had started as a minor inconvenience. His 2018 Ford F-150, usually as reliable as he was, had developed a whine in the alternator. He'd dropped it off at Miller's Auto Shop just down the road. The mechanic, a good kid named Dave, told him it would be 4 hours. Thorne didn't want to sit in the waiting room smelling of grease and old coffee, and he had a routine dental cleaning scheduled at the VA clinic across town. He decided to take public transit. It was a nice day. The bus system was efficient enough. He'd walked the half-mile to the transfer point at Elm and Main, bought a large unsweetened iced tea from the corner deli, and taken a seat on the bench. He was dressed as he always was when he left the house, a navy blue polo shirt tucked neatly into khaki slacks, a leather belt, and polished loafers. He looked like exactly what he was, a retired professional enjoying a spring afternoon. He checked his watch. The number 14 bus was running 10 minutes late. He unfolded his newspaper, eager to catch up on the local city council minutes. He had been sitting there for perhaps 20 minutes when he noticed the patrol car slow roll past him. He didn't look up, but his situational awareness, honed by decades in hostile territories, picked up the vehicle immediately. He felt the eyes on him. He knew the look. Being a black man of his generation, he had experienced it in the 70s, the 80s, and every decade since. The suspicion, the assumption that his presence was a question mark that needed an answer. He had hoped the officer would keep driving. Thorne wasn't doing anything but reading about zoning laws. But the car had circled back, U-turned aggressively, and screeched to a halt directly in front of the bus shelter. Thorne had folded his paper calmly, taken a sip of his tea, and prepared himself. He knew his rights. He knew the law, and he knew that he had fought too hard for this country's constitution to let a 20-something-year-old beat cop trample on it because he was bored. "I'm just having tea," Thorne had said when Vance first stormed up, but he could see it in the boy's eyes. This wasn't about tea. This wasn't about the bus. This was about a power trip. Thorne looked at the officer's nameplate, K. Vance. He memorized it instantly. He looked at the badge number 492. Memorized. He noted the time on the bank clock across the street, 1:17 p.m. If this boy wanted to dance, Thorne would let him lead, but Thorne would decide when the music stopped. He wasn't scared. He was disappointed. He thought about the young Marines he had trained, boys the same age as Vance, who understood that respect was earned, not demanded at gunpoint. This officer had no discipline, and that made him dangerous. The chain of events that brought Officer Vance to that corner hadn't started with police work. It started with Deborah Lewis. Deborah was 45 years old, the manager of Whimsy and Willow, a high-end home goods boutique located directly across the street from the bus stop. Deborah considered herself the unofficial guardian of the neighborhood. She was the administrator of the local Oak Creek Watch Facebook group and a power user of the Citizen Crime Tracking app. She spent her days organizing color-coded displays of throw pillows and staring out the front window of her shop, looking for anything that disrupted her carefully curated view of the world. At 12:55 p.m., she had spotted Marcus Thorne walking towards the bus stop. To most people, Thorne looked like a grandfather going about his day. To Deborah Lewis, he was an anomaly. He was walking too confidently. He was looking around too much. He was looking for traffic. And most damning of all, in Deborah's mind, he was a black man she didn't recognize standing in front of her shop's view for more than 5 minutes. She watched him from behind a display of scented candles. He sat down. He read a paper. He drank tea. To Deborah, this was loitering. It was staking out the area. Why was he sitting there so long? Why wasn't he on a bus yet? She didn't know the number 14 was late. She didn't care. Her imagination began to fill in the blanks of a crime that hadn't happened. "He's watching the customers," she muttered to her assistant, a college student named Sarah, who was busy tagging inventory. "Who?" Sarah asked, glancing up. "The guy at the bus stop. He looks like he's just waiting, Deb." "No," Deborah snapped. "He's been there 20 minutes. He's watching who goes in and out. He's looking at cars. I saw him peering into that Lexus that parked earlier." Thorne had glanced at the Lexus because it had parked crookedly and nearly clipped the curb. But in Deborah's narrative, he was casing it for a smash and grab. She stewed for another 5 minutes, her anxiety spiraling into indignation. Who does he think he is making people uncomfortable? No one was uncomfortable except her. People were walking past Thorne without a second glance. But Deborah felt it was her duty to intervene. She pulled out her phone and dialed the non-emergency line, but then hung up. Non-emergency took too long. She dialed 911. 911, what is your emergency? Yes, I'm at the corner of Elm and Main. There is a suspicious individual loitering at the bus stop. He's been here for half an hour. He's harassing people. Harassing people, ma'am? Is he physically threatening anyone? The dispatcher asked. Deborah hesitated. She knew if she said no, they might not send anyone. He's shouting at women walking by, and he was looking into cars like he's trying to break in. I'm scared to leave my store. It was a lie, a fabrication born of bias and boredom, but it was the magic word. Scared. Break in. Okay, ma'am, we have officers in the area. Description: black male, older, blue shirt. He's very aggressive looking. Please hurry. The call went out over the radio. Suspicious person. Elm and Main. Possible auto prowler. Harassing pedestrians. Officer Vance was 2 blocks away, parked in a fire lane, eating a protein bar. When the call came in, he perked up. Harassing women. Casing cars. This was it. A chance to bust a vagrant, maybe get a resisting charge, show the sergeant he was cleaning up the streets. He tossed the wrapper on the floorboard, wiped his mouth, and threw the cruiser into gear. He didn't turn on his lights and sirens. He wanted to catch the guy in the act. He wanted the element of surprise. He sped toward the intersection, his mind already made up about who he would find. A bum, a drunk, someone who needed to be taught a lesson about whose town this was. He didn't verify the details. He didn't observe from a distance. He drove straight into a situation he wasn't smart enough to handle, armed with a lie from a woman watching through a window and his own blinding prejudice. Officer Vance slammed his door shut, not bothering to lock it. He adjusted his belt, hitching it up in that way he thought looked authoritative, but actually looked nervous. He bypassed every standard procedure for a consensual contact. He didn't walk up and ask, "How are you doing today?" He didn't ask, "Can I help you find something?" He went straight to combat mode. The failure to de-escalate began before he even opened his mouth. His body language was a scream of aggression. Shoulders hunched, hand hovering near the weapon, marching in a straight line that cut off Thorne's path of retreat. Not that Thorne was trying to retreat. "You stand up," Vance had barked initially. Now, 3 minutes into the encounter, the dynamic had shifted from a police stop to a standoff. A small crowd was forming. A young man with headphones had stopped to watch. A woman pushing a stroller slowed down, sensing the tension. "I asked you for ID." Vance snapped, his face flushing red. "You are refusing to identify yourself during a police investigation." Thorne held his ground, his voice calm, measuring every syllable. "Officer, under state law, I am only required to identify myself if I am being detained for a suspected crime. You have not articulated a crime. You said suspicious. Suspicion is not a crime. Sitting on a bench is not a crime. Unless you can tell me exactly what statute I have violated, I am under no obligation to show you my papers. This is America, not a checkpoint in a war zone." Vance hated lawyer types. He hated people who knew the rules better than he did. It made him feel small, and Vance compensated for feeling small by getting loud. "I'm investigating a report of a suspect looking into cars and harassing women," Vance said, his voice rising an octave. "You fit the description. That gives me reasonable suspicion. Now give me your ID or you're going in for obstruction." "I haven't moved from this bench in 20 minutes, Thorne said, gesturing to the empty space around him. "Ask the lady in the flower shop. Ask the bus driver when he gets here. I am waiting for the number 14. If you want my ID to write a ticket, write me a ticket for waiting. Otherwise, leave me alone." "You think you're smart." Vance stepped in close enough that Thorne could smell the mint of his chewing gum and the stale coffee on his breath. You think you can just talk back to me? I'm not talking back, Thorne said, his eyes hard as flint. I'm speaking to you as a man, and I'm telling you, you are barking up the wrong tree. Step back out of my face. Make me, Vance challenged, a juvenile taunt that had no place in professional policing. I don't need to make you, Thorne said softly. The Constitution will do that for me. You are violating my Fourth Amendment rights. You are seizing my person without probable cause. There are cameras on that bank. There are people filming you right now. Vance glanced around. He saw the phones. 2, maybe 3 people were recording. For a smarter officer, this would be the moment to pivot. To step back, de-escalate, maybe crack a joke, ask a few polite questions, and diffuse the tension. But Vance saw the cameras and felt cornered. If he backed down now, he looked weak. If he walked away, he lost. And in Vance's binary world, you were either the predator or the prey. He wasn't going to be the prey. Last chance, Vance said, reaching for his handcuffs. ID now. Am I under arrest? Thorne asked. You are now, Vance growled. Turn around. The physical contact was sudden and unnecessary. Vance didn't guide Thorne. He lunged. He grabbed Thorne's left wrist, the same arm that had taken shrapnel in the Gulf 30 years ago, and twisted it sharply behind the older man's back. Thorne winced a sharp intake of breath through his nose, but he didn't pull away. His Marine Corps training kicked in instantly. Do not resist. Do not give him an excuse. Compliance is your weapon now. If Thorne had wanted to, he could have disarmed the young officer. He knew 3 different ways to break the hold Vance was using. He could have swept Vance's leg and put him on the pavement in under 2 seconds. But Marcus Thorne knew that if a black man fought back against a white cop on a suburban street corner, the headline wouldn't be, "Veteran defends himself." It would be, "Suspect shot after struggle." So, Gunny Thorne stood still. He let his body go rigid, allowing Vance to manhandle him. I am complying, Thorne said, loudly projecting his voice for the cell phone microphones. I am not resisting. You are hurting my shoulder. I have a prior injury. Stop tensing up, Vance yelled, playing to an audience that wasn't buying it. He shoved Thorne forward, slamming the older man's chest against the plexiglass wall of the bus shelter. The impact rattled the structure. Thorne's tee fell to the ground, splashing onto his polished shoes. You are making a mistake, Thorne said again, his cheek pressed against the cold plastic. I am a retired staff non-commissioned officer of the United States Marines. I have served this country for 26 years. You are arresting an innocent man. Tell it to the judge, liar, Vance spat. He fumbled with his cuffs, his hands shaking slightly from the adrenaline dump. He slapped the metal bracelets onto Thorne's wrists. He ratcheted them down, click, 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 click. Tight. Too tight. They bit into the bone. Officer, the cuffs are too tight, Thorne stated flatly. I am losing circulation. They're not comfortable. They're not supposed to be, Vance retorted, reciting a line he'd heard in a movie. He grabbed Thorne by the tricep and spun him around. The crowd had grown. A woman in a business suit stepped forward. Officer, he really was just waiting for the bus. I saw him. He hasn't done anything. Back up, Vance shouted at her, pointing a finger. Interfere, and you're next back up. I'm just a witness, the woman said, holding up her phone. And I have this whole thing recorded. You didn't even ask him what happened. I don't need your opinion. Vance grabbed Thorne's arm and marched him toward the cruiser. Thorne walked with dignity, his head high despite the pain in his shoulder and the humiliation of being paraded in handcuffs through the neighborhood he had fought to protect. He saw Deborah Lewis watching from her shop window across the street. She looked pale. She had gotten what she wanted. The suspicious man was being removed, but something about the way Thorne carried himself, even in chains, made her stomach turn. He didn't look like a criminal. He looked like a king being led to the gallows by a peasant. Vance opened the back door of the cruiser and shoved Thorne inside. Thorne had to duck awkwardly to fit his tall frame into the cramped plastic seat. The door slammed shut, sealing him in the hot, stagnant air of the police car. Vance got into the front seat, breathing heavy sweat beading on his forehead. He picked up the radio microphone. Dispatch 492, one in custody. Resisting obstruction, disorderly conduct. Transporting to station. Copy 4-9-2, the dispatcher crackled back. Thorne sat in the back, the hard plastic digging into his spine. He closed his eyes for a second, centering himself. Breathe, assess, adapt, overcome. He opened his eyes and looked at the back of Vance's head. Officer Vance, Thorne said calmly. Badge number 492. I hope you have a good lawyer, because when we get to that station, your career ends. Shut up, Vance said, turning up the radio to drown him out. But his hand trembled as he put the car in drive. The drive to the precinct took 12 minutes. For Vance, it was a victory lap. He was pumping himself up, rehearsing the narrative in his head. Subject was belligerent, refused lawful order. Crowd was hostile, had to extract for officer safety. He convinced himself he had saved the neighborhood from a menace. For Thorne, the ride was an intelligence-gathering mission. He noted Vance was driving 45 in a 35 zone without lights or sirens, another violation. He noted Vance was texting on his personal cell phone while driving, violation. He noted the officer's erratic lane changes. Thorne filed it all away. He wasn't a prisoner. He was an operative behind enemy lines gathering intel. They pulled into the Sally Port of the Oak Creek police station. The heavy garage door rumbled shut behind them, casting the bay into artificial fluorescent light. Vance hauled Thorne out of the car. Let's go. Move. They walked through the heavy steel doors into the booking area. The station was cool and smelled of floor wax and old coffee. Behind the high booking desk sat Sergeant Thomas Miller. Miller was 58 years old, a chaotic contrast to Vance. Where Vance was shiny and pumped up, Miller was worn leather and granite. He had been a cop for 35 years. Before that, he'd been an MP in the Army. He had tired eyes that had seen everything this town had to offer, and very little surprised him anymore. He was drinking coffee from a mug that said, "World's Okayest Grandpa." Miller looked up as Vance paraded his catch into the room. He took in the scene instantly. He saw Vance, flushed, sweaty eyes, darting aggressive. Then he looked at the prisoner. He saw the shoes first. High gloss, military shine. He saw the pants creased perfectly. He saw the shirt tucked in with a gig line that was laser straight. Then he looked at the face. He saw the gray hair cut high and tight. He saw the jaw set in a line of absolute discipline. And he saw the eyes. They weren't the eyes of a meth head or a brawler. They were the eyes of a man who commanded respect. Sergeant Miller felt a cold rock form in his gut. "What do we have here, Vance?" Miller asked, his voice gravelly. "Disorderly conduct, obstruction, resisting." Vance rattled off, pushing Thorne toward the bench. "Got a call for a suspicious person casing cars. Guy refused to ID, got aggressive, tried to cause a scene." Miller stood up slowly. He walked around the desk. He didn't look at Vance. He looked at Thorne. "Aggressive?" Miller asked, raising an eyebrow. "He resisted. Refused to get on the ground. Refused to put his hands behind his back. Had to go hands-on," Vance bragged. Thorne spoke then. "Sergeant, I request these handcuffs be loosened. I have lost sensation in my right thumb, and I would like to state for the record that I offered no physical resistance, and this officer refused to verify my status as a private citizen waiting for a bus." Miller looked at the handcuffs. They were burying into the wrists. He looked at Vance. "You cranked these down, Kyle. You trying to amputate the man's hands?" "He was moving around," Vance lied. "I haven't moved an inch," Thorne said. "Sergeant, I am asking you to check my wallet. It is in my back right pocket, since Officer Vance here was too busy assaulting me to check it." Miller stepped closer. "Sir, turn around for me." Miller's tone was different. It was respectful. He didn't touch Thorne roughly. He reached into the back pocket and pulled out a slim leather wallet. "Watch out, he might have a knife," Vance sneered. "Shut your mouth, Vance." Miller snapped, not looking back. Miller opened the wallet. There was no cash, just a few cards. He flipped past the Visa. He stopped at the driver's license. Marcus Thorne. No record. Then he flipped the flap. There, behind the clear plastic, was a blue ID card. The seal of the Department of Defense. The bold letters, United States Uniformed Services. Retired. Rank E7 USMC. And tucked behind it was a folded, laminated copy of a citation. It was small old, but legible. Citation for the Silver Star, for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action. Miller stopped breathing for a second. He read the rank again. Gunny. He looked at the citation. Gallantry. He closed the wallet slowly. He looked up at Thorne. Then he turned to Vance. The look on Miller's face was terrifying. It wasn't anger. It was the quiet realization of a catastrophe. "Vance," Miller said, his voice dropping to a whisper that was louder than a scream. "Give me the key." "What, Sarge? He's..." "Give me the key." Vance handed over the handcuff key, confused. Miller stepped behind Thorne and unlocked the cuffs instantly. He helped Thorne massage his wrists where deep red welts had formed. "Mr. Thorne," Miller said, handing him the wallet with two hands like an offering. "I apologize. I apologize on behalf of this department. Are you injured?" "Shoulder's a bit stiff, Sergeant, but I'll live," Thorne said, pocketing his wallet. Vance looked between them. "Sarge, what are you doing? That's a suspect. He refused to ID. He was loitering." Miller spun around. He walked right up to Vance, getting into his personal space. "You idiot. You absolute monumental idiot. Do you know who you just arrested?" "A vagrant." Vance guessed his confidence crumbling. "You arrested a retired Marine gunnery sergeant, a Silver Star recipient, a man who was waiting for a bus to go to the dentist." Miller held up the booking sheet Vance had started. "You put here aggressive, vagrant. I'm looking at a man who's more squared away than you will ever be in your entire life." He didn't show me ID," Vance stammered. "Because he didn't have to," Miller roared, echoing off the concrete walls. "We've been over this, Vance. You can't just stop people because they're black and you're bored. You need probable cause. A woman calling 911 because she's nosy is not probable cause." Miller walked over to the computer and pulled up the dispatch log. "Caller Deborah Lewis. Complaint suspicious person. No crime articulated. Dispatch notes, subject is sitting at bus stop." Miller turned back to Vance. "You went in hot on a guy sitting at a bus stop. You put hands on a senior citizen. You arrested a war hero for waiting." I thought..." Vance trailed off. "Lieutenant Baker is in his office," Miller said, pointing down the hall. "Go there, now. Put your gun and your badge on his desk. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. Get out of my sight before I rip that uniform off you myself." Vance looked at Thorne. Thorne just stared back, rubbing his wrist. The young officer looked small now. The hero complex had popped. He realized with a sinking horror that there was no union rep in the world who could spin this. He walked down the hall, head down, a dead man walking. Miller turned back to Thorne. "Gunny, can I get you some water coffee? I can have a squad car driven by a competent officer take you to your appointment. Or home, wherever you want to go." "I missed my appointment, Sergeant," Thorne said, checking the clock on the wall. "But I would appreciate a ride back to my car. And I would like the name of your watch commander and a complaint form, a long one." "I'll print it myself," Miller said. "And sir, thank you for your service, and I'm sorry." "You didn't do it, Sergeant," Thorne said, looking down the hall where Vance had disappeared. "But you're going to help me fix it." The fallout was swift, brutal, and public. The video recorded by the woman at the bus stop hit the internet 3 hours later. It was titled, "Cop Attacks Elderly Veteran for Waiting for Bus." By evening news, it had 2 million views. By the next morning, it was national. The visual was undeniable. The calm, dignified black man in slacks versus the screaming, aggressive young cop. The "I am a retired Marine" line became a soundbite played on every cable news channel. The Oak Creek Police Department didn't even try to fight it. The chief of police held a press conference the next day. He looked tired. He announced that Officer Kyle Vance had been terminated effective immediately. Not suspended. Fired. The union, seeing the public outcry and the sheer stupidity of the arrest, refused to back Vance. He was decertified by the state board 3 months later, meaning he could never work as a police officer in the state again. At 28, his career was buried under his own ego. Deborah Lewis didn't escape either. Internet sleuths identified Whimsy and Willow from the background of the video. The 911 call was released under the Freedom of Information Act. Her voice, shaking with fake fear about a man harassing women, was played side by side with the video of Thorne sitting peacefully. She was dubbed Storefront Sarah online. Her business rating tanked to 1 star. She was charged with filing a false police report, a misdemeanor, but enough to shame her into closing her shop and moving 2 towns over. Marcus Thorne sued the city and the police department for unlawful arrest, excessive force, and civil rights violations. His lawyer, a shark from the city who offered to take the case pro bono just for the publicity, didn't have to do much work. The city settled in mediation to avoid a jury trial. They knew a jury would look at Gunny Thorne, look at the video, and give him the keys to the city. The settlement was $4.5 million. Thorne didn't buy a yacht. He fixed his truck. He donated a substantial amount to the local VFW and started a scholarship fund for children of Marines in his old unit. 6 months later, Thorne stood at the same bus stop. He was wearing the same blue polo and khakis. He was waiting for his car to get an oil change. The bus shelter had a new bench. A police cruiser rolled by. It was a new officer, a young woman. She slowed down, looked at Thorne, and gave a polite wave. Thorne nodded back. He took a sip of his iced tea. The air was crisp. The system had worked eventually, but only because he had the rank, the discipline, and the fortitude to survive the encounter. He thought about the men who didn't have his training. The young kids who would have panicked, ran, or fought back and ended up as a statistic instead of a millionaire. He realized that his victory wasn't just for him. It was a warning shot. A reminder that a badge is a heavy thing and it crushes those who aren't strong enough to carry it with honor. Marcus Thorne folded his newspaper, checked his watch, and boarded the number 14 bus. He had a dentist appointment to get to, and this time he wasn't going to be late. The cost of freedom is often paid by those who are treated as if they don't deserve it. Marcus Thorne fought for his country only to have to fight for his dignity on a street corner. But justice, when demanded with discipline and courage, can still prevail. Do you think officers like Vance should face criminal charges, not just firing? And should people who make false 911 calls be held financially responsible for the aftermath? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you believe these stories of truth and accountability need to be told, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us shine a light where it's needed most.
Stand up,
You're
now.
standing. You're being detained.
I'm disabled. Sitting on a public bench is not a crime.
Show me your ID. Don't reach for anything.
Can't have it both ways.
I'm telling you, this is an unlawful stop.
Last warning, get on the ground.
I cannot, and your camera's recording every second of this.
The morning sun was shining brightly over the manicured grass of Memorial Park. It was 10:15 a.m. a time when the neighborhood was usually quiet save for the distant hum of traffic and the chirping of birds. Sitting on a green metal bench, dressed in pressed khaki slacks and a crisp navy blue polo shirt, was Elias Thorne. At 62 years old, Elias carried himself with a rigid, undeniable dignity. His posture was upright. His gray hair was trimmed close to the scalp in a military fade, and next to his right knee rested a sturdy, polished oak cane. He wasn't doing anything suspicious. He wasn't shouting. He was simply breathing, enjoying the warmth of the sun on his face, trying to ease the stiffness in his joints that plagued him every morning. Standing over him, casting a shadow that Elias found particularly irritating, was Officer Kyle Miller. Miller looked to be about 28 years old, his uniform slightly too tight across the chest, his hand resting ominously near the grip of his service weapon. Miller was the type of officer who confused intimidation with authority. He saw a black man sitting alone near a municipal playground, even though the playground was currently empty of children, and decided that this was a problem that needed solving. Miller had been on the force for 4 years, long enough to know the rules, but apparently not long enough to learn respect. "I don't care where you live," Miller snapped, his voice echoing slightly in the empty park. "We've had reports of vagrants in this area. You fit the description. Black male loitering, refusing to move along. Now I am conducting a Terry stop. You are detained. Get up." Elias looked at the young man over the rim of his reading glasses. He didn't blink. He didn't flinch. A Terry stop requires reasonable, articulable suspicion that a crime has been committed, is being committed, or is about to be committed. Elias said, his voice a low, rumbling baritone that commanded attention. "Sitting on a bench is not a crime. Existing in a public park while black is not a crime. And I am not a vagrant. My name is Elias Thorne, and I am resting my legs. I don't have time for a law lecture from a bum." Miller sneered, stepping closer, invading Elias's personal space. "Last chance. ID. Now. I am not refusing to identify myself," Elias said calmly. "But I will not be treated like a criminal. I am reaching for my wallet in my back right pocket. I am telling you this so you don't overreact and do something we'll both regret." "Don't reach for anything," Miller shouted, his hand dropping to unsnap the retention hood of his holster. "Hands where I can see them. Make up your mind, officer," Elias said, placing his hands back on his knees, palms open and visible. "First you want ID, then you scream when I tell you I'm getting it. You are escalating a situation that does not need to exist. Look around you. Who am I threatening? The pigeons." The sheer absurdity of the situation was beginning to draw attention. Across the street, a woman was walking her dog. 2 blocks down, a landscaping crew paused their leaf blowers. But Officer Miller was too far in to back out now. His ego was on the line. He felt that this older man was challenging his dominance, and in Miller's mind, compliance was mandatory regardless of the law. He didn't see a citizen with rights. He saw a subject who was refusing to bow. "You're being belligerent," Miller said, reverting to the catch-all phrase bad officers use when they have no legal leg to stand on. "I'm calling it in. Resisting an officer and disorderly conduct." "I haven't raised my voice once," Elias replied, his eyes narrowing. "You are the only one shouting, and before you continue down this road, you should know that you are currently violating my Fourth Amendment rights against unreasonable search and seizure. There is no probable cause here." "I make the probable cause," Miller muttered, reaching for his radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 4 Alpha. I've got a non-compliant subject at Memorial Park, requesting backup." Elias shook his head slowly. He had faced down enemy fire in the deserts of Kuwait. He had led men through sandstorms and ambushes. He had retired as a sergeant major after 30 years of service to his country. And now he was being treated like a menace to society by a boy who looked like he hadn't started shaving yet. Before this story takes a darker turn, I need you to do something. Drop a comment below and tell me. Do you think citizens should have to show ID just for sitting in a public park? Yes or no? And if you support our veterans, hit that subscribe button right now. You need to see how this ends. What Officer Kyle Miller didn't know, and didn't care to ask, was the history of the man he was harassing. Elias Thorne was not just a retiree. He was a highly decorated Gulf War veteran. He had been awarded the Silver Star for gallantry in action during Operation Desert Storm, where he had pulled 3 wounded soldiers from a burning Bradley fighting vehicle while under heavy mortar fire. The stiffness in his knees and the ache in his lower back were not just symptoms of old age. They were the lingering reminders of shrapnel and a parachute jump that had gone wrong in 1995. The cane leaning against the bench wasn't a prop. It was a medical necessity prescribed by the Department of Veterans Affairs. Elias had spent his morning at the VA hospital for physical therapy. The therapist had told him to take a walk, but to rest if the pain flared up. That's why he was on the bench. He was following doctor's orders. He was minding his own business. "Officer," Elias said, trying one more time to inject reason into the interaction. "I am a retired sergeant major in the United States Army. I am recovering from injuries sustained in service to this country. If you would simply let me show you my identification without pointing a weapon at me, we could resolve this." "I don't care if you're the President of the United States," Miller spat back. "You disobeyed a lawful order to stand up." "It was not a lawful order," Elias corrected him. "It was a demand based on a hunch, and I physically cannot stand up quickly. My knees are seized up. I need a moment." "You're stalling," Miller said. He stepped forward and kicked the oak cane away from the bench. It clattered onto the concrete path, rolling into the grass. Elias stared at the cane, then looked up at Miller. The calm demeanor he had maintained was beginning to crack, replaced by a cold, simmering fury. "You just destroyed my property and removed my medical device. That is assault, officer." "It's a weapon," Miller retorted. "I secured the scene." From the porch of a bungalow across the street, Mrs. Martha Higgins had seen enough. Martha was 74 years old, the president of the Neighborhood Watch, and she had known Elias for 15 years. She knew he brought her trash cans in when it rained. She knew he organized the neighborhood 4th of July barbecue. She grabbed her smartphone, walked out onto her lawn, and hit record. She didn't say a word. She just zoomed in. "I'm warning you." Miller set his hand, now gripping his baton. "Get on the ground." "I cannot get on the ground," Elias said, enunciating every syllable. "I am disabled. If you force me to the ground, you will cause permanent damage to my legs. I am telling you this now, so it is on the record." "Then I'll help you," Miller said. He lunged forward, grabbing Elias by the left arm. "Do not touch me!" Elias barked, his command voice surfacing. It was the voice that had made privates tremble in basic training. It stopped Miller for a split second. "I am not resisting, but I do not consent to this contact. You are hurting me." Miller yanked Elias's arm, pulling the older man forward. Elias groaned in pain as his bad knee twisted. He tried to brace himself with his right leg, but without his cane he was unstable. He slumped forward, not out of resistance, but out of physical failure. "Stop resisting!" Miller screamed for the benefit of the imaginary audience he thought would support him. He twisted Elias's arm behind his back, applying a joint lock that was completely unnecessary for a compliant elderly subject. "I am not resisting," Elias gritted out through clenched teeth. "I am in pain." "You should have thought of that before you acted like a tough guy," Miller said. He pushed Elias's face down onto the cold metal of the bench. The glasses Elias was wearing were knocked askew, scratching his cheek. Mrs. Martha Higgins shouted from across the street. "He's a disabled veteran, you idiot! Leave him alone!" Miller looked up, seeing the phone pointed at him. Instead of realizing his mistake, he doubled down. He couldn't look weak now. He whipped out his handcuffs. "You're under arrest," Miller announced. "For what?" Elias gasped, the pressure on his shoulder becoming unbearable. "Obstruction of justice, disorderly conduct, and resisting arrest." "There was no arrest to resist until you put your hands on me," Elias said, his cheek pressed against the green metal slats. "You are manufacturing crimes to cover up your incompetence." "Shut up." Miller said, ratcheting the cuffs tight. Too tight. The metal bit into the skin of Elias's wrists. Miller hauled Elias up. Elias cried out as his legs struggled to support his weight. "My cane," Elias said. "I need my cane." "You can get it later," Miller said, shoving him toward the patrol car parked at the curb. Elias limped, dragging his right foot. He held his head high despite the humiliation. He looked directly at Mrs. Higgins' camera as he passed. He didn't look like a criminal. He looked like a prisoner of war who was keeping his honor intact. Miller opened the back door of the cruiser and pushed Elias inside. The space was cramped. Elias had to twist his body awkwardly to fit his stiff legs in. Miller slammed the door, sealing Elias in the humid, plastic-smelling cage. Miller walked back, picked up the cane from the grass and threw it into the trunk of the car. He didn't bag it as evidence. He just tossed it in. Then he got into the driver's seat, breathing heavily, adrenaline pumping through his veins. He felt powerful. He had won the encounter. He had no idea he had just ended his own career. Inside the patrol car, Elias Thorne sat in silence. The pain in his knees was a throbbing fire, and the handcuffs were cutting off circulation to his thumbs, but he refused to complain to Officer Miller. He utilized a technique he had learned decades ago during SEER survival evasion resistance and escape school. Compartmentalize the pain, focus, the mind observe everything. He watched Officer Miller in the rearview mirror. The young man was checking his reflection, adjusting his collar, looking agitated. Miller picked up his radio. Dispatch suspect in custody, en route to the station. Mileage starting at 45,200. Elias memorized the time on the dashboard clock, 10:28 a.m. He memorized the route Miller took, noting that Miller was driving 10 miles over the speed limit without lights or sirens. He noted that Miller did not buckle Elias's seatbelt, a violation of department policy regarding prisoner transport. Every detail was being filed away in Elias's disciplined mind. "You comfortable back there?" Miller asked sarcastically, glancing back. "Maybe next time you'll show some respect when an officer asks you a question." Elias remained silent. He knew his rights. He had stated them. Now anything he said could be twisted. Silence was his shield. Miranda hadn't been read yet, but Elias knew the game. He wasn't going to give Miller a single word to use in a report. "Yeah, that's what I thought. Quiet now." Miller laughed nervously. The silence was actually unnerving him. Usually people begged or screamed or cursed. Elias just stared at the back of Miller's head with an intensity that burned. The drive to the precinct took 15 minutes. When they pulled into the Sallyport, the automatic garage door rumbled down behind them, sealing them in the concrete intake area. Miller hauled Elias out of the car. "Walk," Miller ordered. "I am walking as best I can without my prescribed medical device," Elias said calmly. They entered the processing area. The air smelled of industrial cleaner and stale coffee. Behind the high intake desk sat Desk Sergeant Thomas Kowalski. Kowalski was a legend in the department, a 58-year-old former Marine who had seen everything done, everything, and had zero tolerance for nonsense. He was 2 months away from retirement and spent his days ensuring that the paperwork was perfect. Kowalski looked up from his computer screen. He saw Miller looking flushed and aggressive, pushing a well-dressed older black man who was clearly in physical distress. Kowalski's eyes narrowed. He looked at Elias's haircut, high and tight gray but precise. He looked at Elias's bearing. He looked at the way Elias stood even while handcuffed. Game recognizes game. "What do we have here, Miller?" Kowalski asked, his voice gravelly. "Disorderly conduct. Resisting failure to identify." Miller rattled off, placing Elias's wallet and the cane, which he had retrieved from the trunk, onto the counter. "Failure to identify," Kowalski repeated. "Did he have ID on him?" "He wouldn't show it. He was reaching for it in a threatening manner." Miller lied. "I see," Kowalski said. He looked at Elias. Sir, are you injured? You're favoring that right leg. I am a disabled veteran sergeant, Elias said, speaking to Kowalski with the respect of one NCO to another. I was denied my cane during the arrest. My knees are damaged from service. Kowalski's expression darkened. He reached for the wallet Miller had thrown on the counter. He opened it. The first thing he saw was the California driver's license. Elias James Thorne. Then he flipped the flap. There it was. The Department of Defense Uniformed Services ID card. Retired. Grade E9. Sergeant Major. Kowalski paused. He flipped another card. The VA medical identification card listing service-connected disability. Kowalski looked up at Miller. Miller, uncuff this man, now. Sarge, he was resisting, I gave you a direct order, officer. Kowalski roared, standing up. This man is a retired sergeant major. You arrested a disabled vet for sitting in a park. Are you out of your mind? Miller froze. The authority in Kowalski's voice was absolute. He refused to stand up. Because he's disabled, you moron. Kowalski came around the desk. He didn't wait for Miller. He pulled his own key out and unlocked Elias's handcuffs. Sergeant Major, I apologize. Let's get these off you. Elias rubbed his wrists. There were deep red indentations where the metal had bitten in. Thank you, Sergeant. Miller, go into the shift commander's office. Don't speak to anyone. Just sit there, Kowalski ordered. But the charges, Miller started. There are no charges, Kowalski said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You better pray there are no charges against you. Get out of my sight. Miller walked away looking confused and sullen. He still didn't understand the magnitude of what he had done. Kowalski turned back to Elias. Sergeant Major, can I get you a chair? Some water, I'll get the lieutenant down here immediately. I'll take the chair, Sergeant, Elias said, sitting down heavily and taking his cane. But don't tear up that booking sheet just yet. I want everything documented. I was brought in here against my will. I want the record to reflect that. Sir, we can release you right now, Kowalski said gently. We can call it a misunderstanding. You walk out the door, we drive you home. Elias looked at Kowalski. He saw a good man, a fellow soldier, trying to do a solid. But this was bigger than professional courtesy. Sergeant, if I walk out that door now without a paper trail, that boy out there learns nothing. And the next time he sees a black man on a bench who doesn't have a sergeant major's ID in his pocket, he's going to do it again. And that man might not survive it. No, process me. Or call your lieutenant and tell him I'm demanding a full report. Kowalski nodded slowly. He understood. I'll call the lieutenant. You sit tight, Top. Lieutenant Greg Harrison was having a quiet Tuesday until his office phone rang. It was Kowalski. LT, you need to get down to processing. We have a situation with a capital S. Harrison walked into the processing area and saw the scene. An elderly, dignified black man sitting in a holding chair massaging his knees. Kowalski standing guard like a sentry. Officer Miller nowhere to be seen. Kowalski handed Harrison the wallet and the preliminary intake form. Harrison scanned the IDs, retired E9. Silver Star recipient indicated on the license plate info listed on the keys. What happened? Harrison asked. Miller brought him in for loitering at Memorial Park, Kowalski reported. Claimed he wouldn't stand up. Suspect stated he was physically unable to stand due to service injuries. Miller used force, transported him without seatbelts, denied him his cane. Harrison felt a migraine forming behind his left eye. This was a public relations nuclear bomb. Where is Miller? In the break room. I told him to shut up. Harrison approached Elias. Mr. Thorne, I'm Lieutenant Harrison. I'm the watch commander. I am very sorry for the inconvenience. We're going to get you a ride home immediately. No charges will be filed. Elias looked up. Lieutenant, inconvenience is when the grocery store is out of milk. This was an unlawful deprivation of liberty assault and battery under color of authority. I'm not going home yet. Sir, I want a copy of the incident report. I want Officer Miller's badge number and full name written down. I want the body camera footage preserved. And I want a medical evaluation for my wrists and knee before I leave this station. You are going to document every bruise. Harrison realized that Elias Thorne knew exactly how the system worked. He wasn't going to let them sweep this under the rug. Sir, we can certainly preserve the evidence, Harrison said, trying to remain calm. But you don't need to stay here. We can handle the medical. I am staying right here until my lawyer arrives, Elias said. I used my one phone call while Sergeant Kowalski was briefing you. Samuel Vance is on his way. Harrison's face went pale. Samuel Vance wasn't just a lawyer. He was the civil rights attorney in the state. He was a shark in a three-piece suit who ate police departments for lunch. And coincidentally, he was an old friend of Elias from their VFW post. Mr. Vance is coming here. He is, Elias said. So I suggest you go check that body camera footage right now, Lieutenant. Because when Sam gets here, he's going to want to see it too. Harrison went back to his office and pulled up the server. He found Miller's upload. He hit play. He watched the sunlit park. He heard Elias's calm voice. He heard Miller's aggression. He saw the kick that sent the cane flying. He saw the twist of the arm. He heard the neighbors screaming that Elias was a veteran. My God, Harrison whispered. It was worse than he thought. There was absolutely no probable cause. Miller had just bullied an old man because he could. Harrison called the captain at home. Cap, you need to come in. We have a major problem. Miller arrested a Silver Star recipient for sitting on a bench. Samuel Vance is on his way. And, Cap, the video is bad. It's really bad. Meanwhile, in the break room, Officer Miller was texting his union rep. He still felt he was in the right. Guy was non-compliant, he typed. Sarge is blowing this out of proportion. He had no idea that in the processing room the machinery of justice was already turning against him, fueled by the very rigidity and discipline Elias Thorne had lived his life by. By the time Samuel Vance walked into the station wearing a tailored suit and carrying a leather briefcase, the mood in the precinct was funeral. Vance didn't even stop at the desk. He walked straight to Elias, shook his hand, and then turned to Lieutenant Harrison. Lieutenant, Vance said, his voice smooth like velvet over gravel. My client has been unlawfully seized. I assume you are preparing the release paperwork and the preservation orders for all data related to Officer Kyle Miller. We are Mr. Vance, Harrison said. Good. We're going to the hospital now for a documented injury report. We will be in touch. Vance helped Elias up. Elias took his cane, straightened his polo shirt, and looked at the station around him. You have good men here, Lieutenant, Elias said, nodding at Kowalski. But you have a cancer in your ranks. You best cut it out before it kills the whole body. They walked out into the afternoon sun. Elias Thorne had entered in handcuffs. He left as a plaintiff. And the fight had just begun. The lawsuit was filed 48 hours later. Thorne versus City of Springfield et al. It alleged violations of the 4th and 14th Amendments, false imprisonment, assault, and battery. But before the court clerk even stamped the papers, the court of public opinion was already in session. Mrs. Martha Higgins' video hit the internet on Wednesday evening. She had posted it to her Facebook page with the caption, Our neighborhood hero Sergeant Major Thorne getting treated like a dog by the police. Shameful. Within 3 hours, it had 10,000 shares. By Thursday morning, it was on the front page of Reddit. By Thursday afternoon, it was on CNN. The visuals were devastating. A young white officer kicking a cane away from an elderly black man. The audio was crystal clear. I am a disabled veteran. I cannot stand up. The juxtaposition of Elias's dignity against Miller's cruelty was impossible to ignore. Veterans groups went ballistic. The VFW, the American Legion, and the Disabled American Veterans issued a joint statement condemning the arrest. The hashtag stand with Elias began trending. People were furious not just because he was a veteran, but because he was a human being minding his own business. The police department tried to get ahead of it. The chief of police, a man named Roberts, held a press conference. He looked tired. "We are aware of the incident involving Mr. Elias Thorne," Chief Roberts read from a prepared statement. "We take these allegations seriously. Officer Miller has been placed on administrative leave pending an internal investigation. We ask the public for patience." But the public had no patience. They had eyes. Samuel Vance held his own press conference on the steps of the federal courthouse. Elias stood next to him, leaning on his cane, wearing his dress blues. He didn't speak. His uniform spoke for him. The rows of ribbons, the silver star, the stripes on his sleeves. "This uniform represents 30 years of protecting the freedoms of every American," Vance told the cameras, "including the freedom to sit on a park bench without being molested by the government. Officer Miller didn't just assault a man, he assaulted the Constitution. We are not just seeking damages, we are seeking change." Back at the precinct, the morale had tanked. Good officers were being screamed at on the street. "You gonna arrest my grandpa too?" people shouted. The actions of one man were tainting the badge for everyone. Internal Affairs investigator Maria Gonzalez was assigned the case. She was thorough and merciless. She pulled Miller's file. What she found was a pattern that had been ignored for too long. Over his 4 years, Miller had a statistically improbable rate of Terry stops. 85% of the people he stopped were Black or Latino men. 60% of them were over the age of 40. He had a habit of stopping older minority men, perhaps because he felt they were less of a physical threat than younger men, but he could still exert dominance. She found 3 prior complaints of rudeness that had been dismissed as unfounded by his previous sergeant. One complaint involved a 50-year-old school teacher who Miller had handcuffed for walking in the roadway when he was crossing the street to get his mail. Gonzalez watched the Bodycam footage of the Thorne arrest again. She noted the moment Miller turned off his audio for 30 seconds after putting Elias in the car, a violation of policy. She noted the lack of seatbelt. She noted the kick to the cane. She interviewed Miller. He was defensive. "I was following my training. He was in a high-crime area." "The playground is a high-crime area?" Gonzalez asked. "There's drug activity there at night," Miller said. "It was 10 o'clock a.m. on a Tuesday, Officer Miller, and Mr. Thorne is 62 years old. Did you really fear for your life?" "He was large. He was refusing commands. He was sitting down. He told you he was disabled. You kicked his cane. Do you know what the optics of that are, let alone the legality?" Miller remained silent. For the first time, the arrogance was gone, replaced by the sinking realization that his union rep couldn't save him this time. The blue wall of silence was crumbling because nobody wanted to stand behind the man who handcuffed a Silver Star recipient. As the weeks went on, the investigation into Officer Miller peeled back layers of systemic failure that went beyond just one bad apple. Samuel Vance, through the discovery process of the lawsuit, demanded 5 years of stop-and-frisk data from the department. The data was damning. It showed that while the city was 60% white, 40% of all pedestrian stops were of Black citizens. And in the specific sector Miller patrolled, that number jumped to 70%. Vance found a former rookie who had ridden with Miller. In a deposition, the rookie admitted, "Miller used to say that you have to establish the alpha immediately. If they don't bow down, you find a reason to hook them up. He called it humble pie." Elias sat in the deposition room listening to this. He thought about the young soldiers he had trained. He taught them rules of engagement. He taught them that deadly force was a last resort. He taught them that you protect the weak. Miller had been taught or had decided that the badge made him a king. The city attorney looked at the deposition transcripts. He looked at the video again. He looked at the public polling numbers. "We need to settle," the city attorney told the mayor. If this goes to a jury, they will give Thorne the keys to the city, and Miller needs to be gone, not just fired decertified. He can't be a cop anywhere else. The negotiations began, but Elias had a condition. It wasn't just about the money. "I want an apology," Elias told Vance. "Not from the city, but from Miller. And I want the department to implement mandatory de-escalation training led by outside experts, and I want a citizen review board with subpoena power." "They might fight the review board," Vance warned. "Then we go to trial," Elias said. "I've been in trenches before, Sam. I can wait." The city folded. They couldn't risk the trial. The optics of putting Elias Thorne on the stand, detailing his service to the country, while the defense tried to justify Miller's actions, would be a disaster. 6 months after the incident, the settlement was announced. The city would pay Elias Thorne $1.2 million. The department agreed to a consent decree to overhaul their stop procedures. And most importantly, Officer Kyle Miller was fired. The police chief wrote a letter to the state licensing board recommending that Miller's peace officer certification be revoked. Miller tried to fight it, but the video was his undoing. The board voted unanimously. Kyle Miller would never carry a badge or a gun again. But the story didn't end with the check. The fallout from the Thorne case triggered a statewide review of police interactions with veterans. It turned out Elias wasn't alone. There were dozens of cases of veterans, especially those with PTSD or physical disabilities, being mistreated by police who mistook their symptoms for intoxication or belligerence. Elias took his settlement money and did something that surprised no one who knew him. He didn't buy a new house. He didn't buy a fancy car. He established the Thorne Legal Defense Fund for veterans. The fund was dedicated to providing legal representation for veterans who had been victims of police misconduct. He also partnered with the local VA to create a training program for police officers. The program was called Service to Service. It brought veterans and police officers together. Officers learned how to recognize service-connected disabilities. They learned that a veteran reaching for their waistband might be reaching for a colostomy bag, not a gun. They learned that a veteran not responding to commands might have hearing loss from artillery fire. Elias himself showed up to the first training session. The room was full of rookie officers. They looked nervous. Elias walked to the front of the room leaning on his cane. He looked at them. "I am not here to hate the police," Elias said. "I spent 30 years in uniform. I know what it means to serve. But service means sacrifice. It means discipline. It means you hold yourself to a higher standard than the people you protect. If you cannot control your temper, if you cannot de-escalate, if you need to hurt people to feel powerful, then take off that badge and leave, because you are disgracing it." The room was silent. You could hear a pin drop. Elias continued. "Officer Miller thought he was strong because he had handcuffs. He was weak. Strength is restraint. Strength is patience. Strength is treating a man on a park bench with the same respect you would treat a general. Never forget that." The Thorne rule became a new standard in the department. Policy officers were required to exhaust all verbal avenues and wait for a supervisor before physically engaging a non-violent passive resistor, especially if the subject claimed a disability. It wasn't a perfect fix. There were still problems. There were still bad stops. But the culture began to shift. The alphas, like Miller, found themselves marginalized while the officers who used their brains and their hearts began to rise. 1 year later, on a Tuesday morning, Elias Thorne walked back into Memorial Park. The sun was shining. The birds were chirping. The green metal bench was still there. Elias walked over to it. He was moving a little slower these days. The stress of the past year had taken a toll, but his spirit was unbroken. He sat down. He placed his cane against his knee. He folded his hands in his lap. A patrol car rolled slowly down the street. It slowed as it passed the park. The driver was a young female officer. She saw Elias. She recognized him, everyone did now. She rolled down her window. Elias tensed slightly, an involuntary reaction that he hated but couldn't control. "Good morning, Sergeant Major," the officer called out. She smiled. It was a genuine smile. "Good morning, officer," Elias replied, nodding his head. She rolled the window up and drove on, continuing her patrol. No harassment, no demand for ID, just respect. Elias took a deep breath. The air tasted sweet. He watched a young father pushing his daughter on the swings in the playground nearby. The little girl was laughing, soaring higher and higher into the blue sky. He had fought for this. He had fought in the desert sands, and he had fought in the courtroom. He had fought so that he could sit on this bench in this country and be at peace. It shouldn't have been this hard. It shouldn't have taken a viral video and a lawsuit to get a police officer to follow the law. But Elias knew that freedom is never free. It has to be defended constantly, not just from foreign enemies, but from domestic arrogance and abuse of power. He closed his eyes and let the sun warm his face. He was tired, but he was content. He had held the line. Elias Thorne's story is a powerful reminder that authority without accountability is tyranny. He stood up for his rights by sitting down, and in doing so, he protected the rights of everyone who comes after him. It's a hard truth that even our heroes can be treated like criminals if we aren't vigilant. I want to leave you with a question to think about today. If Mrs. Higgins hadn't filmed that encounter, do you think Officer Miller would still be on the streets today? And what can we do to ensure that our veterans are treated with the dignity they deserve? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story moved you, please share it. Justice thrives in the light, and your share helps turn that light on. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.
Step away from the door, now. You don't belong here.
I'm waiting for the owner. My hands are visible. I'm not doing anything illegal.
You match the description. Reach for anything, and this goes bad
My
fast.
wallet is in my back pocket. I'm a disabled veteran. Don't
Hands up.
escalate this.
Drop the cane. Get on the ground, now.
Get down. Your body cam is...
The click of the handcuffs wasn't the sound that bothered Elias Thorne the most. It was the sheer disrespect in the young man's voice that cut deeper than the shrapnel buried in his left hip. But before the metal cuffs bit into his wrists, before the shouting, it was just a quiet, sweltering Tuesday afternoon in Georgia. Elias, 64 years old and standing with the stoic posture of a man who had spent 3 decades standing at attention, leaned heavily on his polished oak cane. He was parked physically and mentally outside Reynolds Heavy Equipment Rental, a sprawling brick building surrounded by chain-link fences and the smell of diesel and sawdust. The Georgia sun was unforgiving, beating down on the asphalt with a vengeance that made the air shimmer. Most men his age would be inside with the air conditioning blasting, but Elias didn't mind the heat. It reminded him of simpler times, and honestly, it kept his joints loose. He checked his watch, a battered but reliable field watch he'd worn since the late 80s. Hank was late. Hank Reynolds, the owner of this establishment and Elias's fishing buddy for the better part of 20 years, had gone out for a sandwich and locked the front door. "Just give me 10 minutes, Eli," Hank had said, tossing the keys to his truck. "Wait out front. Keep an eye on the place." So Elias waited. He wore a crisp button-down plaid shirt tucked neatly into khaki slacks held up by a leather belt that had seen better days. On his head sat a hat that simply said, "Veteran," in gold stitching. He wasn't looking for trouble. He was looking for a shady spot to rest his leg. He found a sliver of shade under the awning and watched the traffic roll by. That was when the cruiser rolled up. It didn't approach with sirens. It prowled. It was a black and white Dodge Charger, gleaming and aggressive, moving slow like a shark in shallow water. Elias watched it without turning his head, just shifting his eyes, a habit from his days on patrol in places far more dangerous than this suburban strip mall. The car slowed to a crawl right in front of him. The window hummed down. Inside sat a man who looked like he had been manufactured in a factory that built bullies. He couldn't have been more than 29. His jaw was square, his hair high and tight, and he wore sunglasses that cost more than Elias's monthly disability check. This was Officer Brad Miller. He didn't look at Elias like a person. He looked at him like a stain on a freshly scrubbed floor. Miller scanned the storefront, the closed sign in the window, the heavy machinery in the yard, and then his gaze landed back on the black man standing alone by the door. Elias felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. He knew that look. He had seen it in the eyes of enemies abroad, and sadly, he had seen it in the eyes of his own countrymen back home. It was the look of a predator deciding if the prey was worth the energy. Elias tightened his grip on the head of his cane, bracing himself not for a fight, but for the indignity he sensed was coming. He took a slow breath, holding it in his chest, willing his heart rate to stay steady. He had done nothing wrong. He was a citizen, a taxpayer, and a friend of the owner. But he knew with a sinking feeling in his gut that none of that mattered to the man behind the wheel of that cruiser. Officer Miller threw the cruiser into park, not in a designated spot, but diagonally across the entrance, blocking the ramp. It was a power move, plain and simple. He opened the door and stepped out, adjusting his duty belt with a heavy rhythmic clanking of gear. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and walked with a swagger that screamed overcompensation. "You there." Miller barked his voice, carrying that nasal authoritative tone that rookies used when they were trying to sound like seasoned sergeants. "Step away from the door." Elias didn't flinch. He turned his body, slowly pivoting on his good leg, and faced the officer. He kept his hands visible, resting one on the cane and the other hanging loosely by his side. "Good afternoon, officer," Elias said, his voice a deep, gravelly baritone that commanded attention without shouting. "Is there a problem?" Miller stopped 10 feet away, hooking his thumbs into his vest. He chewed on a piece of gum aggressively. "That depends on you, doesn't it? Store's closed. Sign says closed. Yet here you are, hanging around the entrance like you're waiting for an invitation." "I'm waiting for the owner," Elias replied calmly. "Hank Reynolds. He stepped out for lunch. He'll be back in a few minutes." Miller let out a short, dismissive laugh. He took off his sunglasses, revealing eyes that were cold and devoid of empathy. "Hank Reynolds, huh? You two buddies. That's a likely story. I know Hank. He doesn't usually leave folks loitering outside his shop while he's gone." "We are friends," Elias stated, his tone hardening just a fraction. "And I am not loitering. I am waiting." "Look, Pop," Miller sneered, using the term not with affection but with condescension. "I've been patrolling this beat for 6 months. I haven't seen you here before. And lately we've had a lot of reports of tools walking off these lots. You fit the description of someone who might be casing the joint." Elias felt a flash of heat rise up his neck, hotter than the Georgia sun. "I fit the description?" Elias asked slowly. "And what description is that, Officer A, 64-year-old man with a cane and a bad hip? Or is it something else?" Miller's face tightened. He didn't like being challenged. He stepped closer, invading Elias's personal space. "Watch your mouth. I'm asking the questions here. You got no business standing here if the shop is locked. You look like a vagrant to me. Someone looking for copper wire or loose drills." "I am a retired lieutenant colonel," Elias said, drawing himself up to his full height, which was impressive even with the cane. "I served this country for 30 years. I am not a vagrant." "Sure you are," Miller scoffed. "And I'm the King of England. Stolen valor is a crime too, you know. Why don't you do us both a favor and start walking? Get off the property before I decide to write you up for trespassing." "I have permission to be here," Elias insisted, refusing to back down. "Call Mr. Reynolds. His number is on the sign." "I'm not calling anyone." Miller snapped his hand, drifting toward his baton. "I'm telling you to move, now." The air between them grew heavy, charged with a static tension that usually preceded violence. Elias looked at the young officer, seeing the fear masked by aggression. He had trained men like Miller Young, hot-headed, eager to prove they were the alpha dog. But in the military, that attitude got checked by discipline. Here on the street with a badge and a gun, it was dangerous. "I cannot walk away, officer," Elias said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming deadly serious. "I am waiting for my friend. I have done nothing illegal. I have provided you with a reasonable explanation. Now, if you will excuse me, I'm going to sit on that bench until Hank returns." Elias made to turn toward the small wooden bench near the planter. It was a dismissal, and Miller took it as an insult to his authority. "I didn't say you could sit down," Miller shouted. He lunged forward, cutting off Elias's path. "I said I want to see some identification, right now." "You want to prove you are who you say you are. Let's see it." Elias sighed, a sound of profound exhaustion. "It's in my back pocket," he said. He shifted his weight to his cane, preparing to reach back. "Do it slowly." Miller warned, his hand dropping to the holster on his hip. Elias moved his right hand toward his back pocket, but his shoulder shattered by shrapnel during the First Gulf War, and reconstructed with metal pins, didn't move like a young man's shoulder. It caught. A sharp electric jolt of pain shot down his arm, causing him to grimace and jerk his elbow slightly to work through the stiffness. To Officer Miller, who was already running on adrenaline and prejudice, that jerk didn't look like pain. It looked like a draw. "Gun watch the hands!" Miller screamed, stumbling back and ripping his taser from its holster. The yellow plastic weapon was leveled squarely at Elias's chest. The red laser dot danced on the veteran's plaid shirt right over his heart. Elias froze. He didn't raise his hands immediately because he needed the cane to stay upright, but he stopped moving his right hand instantly. "It is my wallet," Elias said, enunciating every syllable clearly. "My shoulder is injured. I cannot move it smoothly. I am a disabled veteran. Put the weapon down, son." "Don't you call me son." Miller roared, his finger quivering on the trigger. "Drop the cane. Get on the ground now, face down on the pavement." "I can't get on the ground," Elias said calmly, though his heart was hammering against his ribs. "If I get down, I cannot get back up without assistance. My hip is fused. I am telling you, I am unarmed. I am reaching for my wallet, as you instructed." "I don't care about your hip. I said get on the ground or I will light you up." Miller was panicking now, the situation spiraling beyond his control because he refused to listen. He saw a threat where there was only a man. "I am not resisting," Elias said, looking Miller in the eye. "But I will not humiliate myself by crawling in the dirt for you. I will stand here. You can come take the wallet yourself if you want it." Miller's ego couldn't handle the defiance. The refusal to submit to his screaming commands broke whatever thin veil of professionalism he had left. He holstered the taser, deciding that electricity wasn't enough gratification. He wanted to put his hands on the man. He wanted to physically force compliance. "Have it your way," Miller growled. He rushed forward, closing the gap in 2 strides. He grabbed Elias by the shoulder, the bad one, and spun him around with violent force. Elias let out a sharp cry of agony as the old injury was wrenched. The cane clattered to the concrete, bouncing with a hollow sound. Without the cane, Elias's legs buckled, but Miller didn't let him fall. He slammed the older man face first against the rough brick wall of the hardware store. "Stop fighting, stop resisting," Miller shouted for the benefit of anyone who might be watching, though Elias was doing neither. Miller grabbed Elias's left arm and twisted it behind his back, forcing it up toward his shoulder blades. The torque on the stiff joints was excruciating. Elias gritted his teeth, beads of sweat popping out on his forehead, his cheek pressed against the scratchy brick. He refused to give this boy the satisfaction of hearing him beg. "You are making a mistake," Elias wheezed, the breath knocked out of him. "A grave mistake." "Shut up." Miller kicked Elias's ankles apart, forcing his legs wide. He grabbed the other wrist and yanked it back. The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting shut was loud in the quiet afternoon. Click, click, click. Miller squeezed them too tight, pinching the skin and cutting off circulation. "There," Miller panted, stepping back but keeping a hand on Elias's neck, pinning him to the wall. "Now you're secure. You want to act like the tough guy. You can tell it to the judge." Elias stood there humiliated, his face pressed against the wall of his best friend's shop. The pain in his shoulder was a throbbing fire radiating down to his fingertips. He closed his eyes for a moment, gathering his strength. He thought of the men he had served with men who had died so that people could be free from tyranny. He thought of the irony of surviving war zones only to be assaulted by a public servant in his own hometown. "Officer," Elias said, his voice strained but steady. "Check my pocket. Get my ID. Read the name." "I'll get to your ID when I'm good and ready," Miller spat. "Right now, you're going to stand there and think about respect. You people think you can just do whatever you want, walk around like you own the place." Miller grabbed Elias's shoulder again to jerk him away from the wall and toward the car, but Elias's knees gave out. Without the cane and with his balance compromised by the cuffs, he slumped. Miller had to hold him up by the handcuff chain, which only increased the pain. "Walking is hard for me," Elias gasped. "I told you." "Stop stalling," Miller said, shoving him forward. "Get to the car." The sound of a heavy diesel engine roaring into the parking lot interrupted Miller's power trip. A white Ford F-350 lifted and covered in mud screeched to a halt right behind the patrol car. The driver didn't even park properly. He just slammed the gear shift into park and killed the engine. The door flew open and out stepped Hank Reynolds. Hank was a bear of a man, 6'4", with a white beard and arms like tree trunks. He was wearing grease-stained coveralls and a baseball cap. When he saw Elias slumped against the hood of the police car, handcuffed and grimacing in pain, Hank's face turned a shade of red that bordered on purple. "Hey!" Hank bellowed, his voice booming across the lot. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Miller spun around, hand dropping to his baton again. "Back off, police business, stay by your vehicle." Hank ignored him entirely. He marched toward them, his heavy boots stomping on the pavement. "Get your hands off him, that's Elias." "What is wrong with you?" Miller stepped between Hank and Elias, putting up a hand to stop the big man. "Sir, I said back off. This suspect is under arrest for loitering, trespassing, and resisting an officer. If you interfere, you're going in the back, too." Trespassing. Hank looked at Miller like he was insane. "Trespassing on whose property? Mine. I own this damn building, and he's waiting for me." Miller blinked, caught off guard. "You're Reynolds." "Damn right I'm Reynolds," Hank spat, pointing a thick finger at Miller's chest. "And that man you've got in cuffs is my best friend. I told him to wait here while I got lunch. Now take those things off him before I lose my temper." Miller's face flushed. He had made a mistake, but his pride wouldn't let him admit it. He doubled down. "It doesn't matter who he is. He refused to identify himself and made a threatening move. He resisted arrest. The cuffs stay on until I process him." "Threatening move?" Hank looked past Miller to Elias. "Eli, you all right?" Elias nodded slowly, though his face was gray with pain. "Shoulders out, Hank. The cuffs. They're tight." Hank turned back to Miller, his eyes narrowing into dangerous slits. "He's a disabled vet, you idiot. He can't move his arm that way. You're hurting him. Uncuff him, now." "I am in charge here," Miller shouted, trying to regain control of the scene. "You need to step back. I don't care if you own the place. He broke the law, and now you're obstructing justice." "I'm obstructing stupidity," Hank growled. "You didn't even ask him, did you? You just saw a black man standing here and decided to play hero." "That is enough." Miller unclipped his radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 4 Alpha. I need backup at Reynolds Rental. I have a hostile crowd forming." "Crowd?" Hank threw his hands up. "It's just me, and I'm the business owner telling you to get off my property and unhand my friend." The standoff was palpable. Miller was cornered by the truth but shielded by his badge. He kept his hand near his weapon, his posture rigid. Hank stood his ground, fuming, his fists clenched at his sides. "You have no idea what you've done, son," Hank said, his voice dropping to a low, trembling register. "You think you caught a criminal? Let me tell you who that man is." "I don't want to hear it," Miller said, looking nervously down the road for his backup. "You're going to hear it," Hank said, stepping closer, ignoring Miller's warning gesture. "That man is Lieutenant Colonel Elias Thorne. He didn't just serve, he commanded. He has a Silver Star for pulling 3 men out of a burning Bradley fighting vehicle while taking fire. That shoulder you're twisting. He took shrapnel there, saving a kid younger than you. He's a hero in this town. He organizes the Memorial Day parade every single year. And you treated him like garbage." Miller's eyes flickered. He knew the name. Everyone in the department knew the name Thorne. The man was a legend in the local VFW. But seeing the man in the faded plaid shirt and the veteran hat, Miller hadn't made the connection. He had only seen the skin color and the cane. "He refused ID," Miller mumbled, his voice losing some of its steam. Protocol says you use your brain," Hank shouted. "Look at him. Does he look like he's resisting? He's standing there with more dignity than you'll ever have in your whole life." Elias spoke up, then his voice quiet. "Hank, let it be. The captain is on his way. I heard the radio." "The captain?" Miller froze. "I requested a supervisor 5 minutes ago." Elias lied smoothly, though in reality he knew that any officer in trouble call would bring the watch commander. "And I believe Captain Vance is on duty today. We served on the police board together last year." Miller's face went pale. Captain Vance was old school. He didn't tolerate incompetence, and he certainly didn't tolerate bad PR. You know Vance," Miller stammered. "I know everyone, Officer Miller," Elias said. "Because I have lived here for 40 years. I built the deck on the back of the precinct. I fish with the mayor. And I was just trying to buy a drill bit." The sound of another siren cut through the air, but this one was different. It was the heavy, authoritative wail of the command unit. A sleek, unmarked SUV whipped into the lot lights flashing behind the grill. The SUV door opened and Captain Vance stepped out. He was a man in his late 50s with salt and pepper hair and a face carved from granite. He didn't rush. He walked with the measured pace of a man who had seen everything and was impressed by nothing. He adjusted his tie, then his belt, and surveyed the scene. He saw the rookie Officer Miller looking sweaty and defensive. He saw Hank Reynolds looking like he was about to punch a hole in the universe. And then he saw Elias Thorne handcuffed, leaning against the fender of the patrol car. Vance stopped dead in his tracks. His eyes went wide for a fraction of a second before narrowing into a glare that could melt steel. "Officer Miller," Vance said, his voice deceptively soft. "Captain." Miller snapped to attention, or tried to. "Sir, I have a situation here. Suspect was loitering, refused ID, reached for a weapon." Vance held up a hand, silencing him instantly. He walked past Miller as if the rookie didn't exist and went straight to Elias. "Colonel," Vance said, his tone respectful, "I assume these bracelets aren't a fashion statement." "Not today, Captain," Elias replied dryly. "Though they are a bit tight." Vance turned slowly to Miller. The look on his face was terrifying. "You handcuffed Elias Thorne for loitering at a hardware store?" "Sir, he fit the profile. He was—" Miller started to stutter. "The profile?" Vance repeated, his voice rising. "The profile of what a customer? A senior citizen, a decorated war hero." He reached for his pocket. "Sir, I thought he had a gun." "He has a cane, you idiot," Vance barked. "And everyone in this town knows about his shoulder. Did you bother to talk to him? Did you bother to listen?" Key, Vance demanded, holding out his hand. Miller fumbled for his keys and handed them over with shaking hands. Vance personally unlocked the cuffs. As soon as the metal clicked open, Elias rubbed his wrists, the skin raw and red. Hank stepped in immediately to support Elias, helping him stand upright. "You okay, Eli?" Hank asked gently. "I'll live," Elias said, rolling his shoulder with a grimace. Vance turned back to Miller. "Officer Miller, you are relieved of duty effectively immediately. You will surrender your badge and your weapon to me right now. You will get in the passenger seat of my vehicle. Another officer will come for your cruiser." "Suspended, sir, for what?" Miller gasped. "For incompetence, for excessive force, for profiling, and for embarrassing this department," Vance said coldly. "We serve this community, Miller. We don't hunt it. Get in the car." Miller looked at Elias, then at Hank, and finally at his captain. He slumped, the arrogance draining out of him, leaving just a scared boy who had played a man's game and lost. He handed over his gear and walked to the SUV with his head down. Vance turned back to the two men. "Colonel, I am deeply sorry. This isn't who we are. I'll handle this personally. You want to file charges?" Elias looked at the young officer sitting in the SUV, head in his hands. He looked at his bruised wrists. "I want him retrained, Vance. I want him to understand that a badge isn't a crown. If he can learn that, maybe he can stay. If not, well, you know what to do." "I do." Vance nodded. "Take care of yourself, Eli." "Hank." Vance got into his SUV and drove off the disgraced rookie in tow. The parking lot fell silent again. The heat was still rising from the asphalt, but the tension had broken. Hank sighed a long, heavy exhale. He reached down and picked up Elias's cane, dusting it off before handing it back. "I am so sorry, Eli. I shouldn't have left you out here alone." Elias took the cane, leaning his weight on it with relief. "It's not your fault, Hank. It's the world we live in. Sometimes it forgets." "It shouldn't," Hank said, his voice thick with emotion. "After everything you gave, it shouldn't forget." "Come on," Elias said, patting his friend's massive arm. "It's hot out here, and I believe you owe me a coffee, and maybe a discount on that rental." Hank chuckled a wet sound. "Free. The rental is free. Coffee is on me. Hell, dinner is on me." The two men, one black, one white, both old and weathered by time and service, walked slowly toward the glass doors of the shop. Elias limped slightly, the pain in his hip a reminder of the day, but his head was high. They went inside into the cool air, leaving the heat and the ugliness of the afternoon behind them. Inside the quiet shop, Hank poured 2 mugs of black coffee from the pot in the corner. They sat on stools by the counter, surrounded by the smell of oil and metal. They didn't speak for a long time. They just drank their coffee, grateful for the silence, grateful for the friendship that transcended the madness outside. Elias looked at his wrists, then at Hank. "We have to be better, Hank, all of us." "We do, Eli," Hank agreed softly. "We really do." The sun began to dip lower, casting long shadows across the floor. In the quiet of the shop, 2 friends sat together, bound not by handcuffs, but by respect. The end reflection. This story reminds us that dignity isn't something you can handcuff, and respect isn't something you can demand with a badge. It must be earned. Elias's strength wasn't in fighting back physically, but in his unshakable character. In a world that is often quick to judge based on appearance, we must remember to look deeper, to listen, and to honor those who have sacrificed for our freedom. What would you have done if you were in Hank's shoes when he pulled up? Do you think Officer Miller deserves a second chance to learn, or should he be fired immediately? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.
This concludes today's report. To access more official footage, please like and subscribe. Thank you for choosing Bodycam Incident Reports.